The entire contents of this podcast and website are based upon the opinions of Tammy Garcia and her guests, unless otherwise noted. The information on this podcast is not intended to replace a one-on-one relationship with a qualified healthcare professional and is not intended as medical advice. It is intended as a sharing of knowledge and information from the research and experience of Tammy Garcia and her guests. This is the Naturally Inspired Podcast, coming to you from our 1890 homestead in Johnstown, Colorado. I'm Tammy, and I want to thank you for joining us. Let's get started and help people feel good so they can do what they love for longer. Today on the Naturally Inspired Podcast, we have Clare Kelway joining us again. Clare is a British-trained naturopath and a functional medicine practitioner. She has been a holistic clinician for over 20 years. Clare is passionate about women's health, and educating her clients to take great care of their health is what she loves to do. She is the owner of Kelway Functional Medicine. And the last time we had Clare on our show, we had a great response from our audience. So I'm really excited that she's back again. And we're going to dive a little further into hormonal health and adrenal health with her today. So welcome, Clare Kelway, to the Naturally Inspired Podcast. Thank you for being on the Naturally Inspired Podcast today again, Clare.
Thank you for having me. I'm so honored. Thank you.
Yeah. We had such great response from you last time when you were on, because this topic of women's health, and we're going to talk about adrenals today too, but this topic of women's health is really still amazingly so in the shadows. You know, we're still really in the shadows, a lot of us, with what's going on as we age and what's happening to our bodies as we age. So I think that's why I got so many emails and I had so many conversations with friends that had listened to the podcast that were like, wow, I just figured out what was going on with me. And I thought I was the only one and wow. Things like that. Yeah. So I'm so glad you've agreed to come back on, because I know there's more that we can dive into.
Sure.
When it comes to hormonal health. And I know that that's your passion. So I'm anxious to get started. So the main question I got from people after talking to them is a big concern is weight gain with hormonal health.
Right.
So I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about how hormones play into weight loss and metabolism.
Absolutely. So let's talk about what is metabolism. So metabolism is the rate at which you burn food.
Okay.
That's it. Simple, right?
Yeah.
So how I like to see that is, so we eat food, and which I call eat.
Yeah.
M is metabolism. And if we add E and M together, we get health. So metabolism is the rate at which you're going to burn that food, and it's going to determine how your health is. So how do hormones play into that? So I think people get confused because we hear about female hormones all the time,
right.
Progesterone and estrogen. But I don't think most of us realize that hormones are switched to every single cell. So when you eat food, you've got it goes into your cells, and your cells have to tell that food what to do with it, which is kind of your metabolism, right?
Right.
And it's that burn rate. But how does it determine the burn rate? It determines the burn rate through your hormones. But your hormones are not just female hormones. So without getting too technical and without getting into too much science here, just to say that we have an endocrine system.
Yes.
So the body's made up of a whole lot of different systems. And so this hormone system is called your endocrine system. And it starts in the brain. People might have heard of this, but it's got pineal, pituitary, and hypothalamus. People have often heard of that. The hypothalamus is like the conductor of the orchestra. Right. That's a really important hormone.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Yeah. And then sitting below that is your thyroid. And your thyroid has a lot to do with metabolism. In fact, I've heard people say, oh, that's your metabolic hormone. Well, not exactly, but it does have a lot to do with hot and cold. You hear about people frozen, and you hear they've got low thyroid.
Right.
And that's part of, they can't distribute temperature evenly through their body. So your thyroid does control a lot of that. And then we come down as you go through the body, you come down the endocrine system. It like kind of is a ladder all the way through the body.
Okay.
And you get to the adrenals, which are two glands that sit just above your kidneys. And those control energy output. So the thyroid is kind of that heat, hot and cold one.
Okay.
But the adrenals control how much we put out there. And they're also our stress glands.
Right.
So they have a lot to do with stress. And we can talk a little bit about that because this does play into it, right? It plays into our female hormones very much.
Okay.
And then beneath that, you have your ovaries and your uterus, which are your female glands, or in men you have prostate and the testes, right? So they're kind of at the bottom, and they are at the bottom of the pipeline in so many ways. And I tell people this because when we go out of balance, so we're out of homeostasis, the first things to go are the female or the reproductive organs, if it's men or women.
Oh,
so
interesting.
It's the first thing, and it's the last thing to come back.
So does that mean like if we have low sex drive, that's an indicator?
Exactly. You got it. So people always say, oh gosh, I've got no libido, right? But when we look at it, they're highly stressed. They may have a thyroid problem. They may have a hypothalamus problem because now there's some things going on in the brain that have over time have been put out of balance. And so in order to get that libido back, you got to go upstream, and you got to correct those other things, right?
Right.
So it's just amazing. I love hormones because they're so fascinating to me about how they interplay with our bodies.
Right.
Yeah.
So how can we test our hormones? I've personally heard of different kinds of tests to test your hormones, and I've heard that some are not very accurate. Can you expand on that? And if we, and what kind of test should we be looking for if we want to get our hormones tested?
Okay. So first of all, I'll say you probably get a different answer from every health professional you ever talk to, because we do have some particular personal favorites depending on our backgrounds and what we've done.
Okay.
But let's start with the doctor. So the doctor runs bloods, right? So he's going to take an estrogen, a progesterone. He's going to look at maybe estradiol. There's different forms of estrogen. Maybe even look at your cortisol. And when I went through the endocrine glands, actually, just so you know, that the pancreas is considered an endocrine gland today too. And so blood sugar is also part of your hormone system. So it's that's a big one when you think about metabolism and everything. Anyway, so the doctor, takes all these spot tests. And I call that a spot test because it's a point in time. You walk into the doctor at that particular point, so we get a reading. Right. And that's true for that moment. But our bodies are dynamic. And they not only, just take women for us, for instance, right? So we have a 24-hour cycle, but we've got a 28-day cycle. Well, we hope it's 28 days, but it's meant to be, right?
Right.
And then we have longer life cycles. So just getting a spot test, how useful is that really? What kind of picture is that really giving us? And we're looking at hormones, right? Not really. Right. So then you have saliva testing, which is a lot more interesting from a holistic perspective. So what you tend to do is you would take saliva samples, and you would take them at like 4 different times during the day, and that would give us cortisol. So we're getting onto cortisol. Cortisol is your stress hormone. Okay. So, hello, we all live in this huge stress world, right? It's a degree of how stressed we actually are. Right. So the salivas will give it a 24-hour. We could actually have middle of the night too. We can have several on waking. We call those circadian awakening responses.
So that's much more accurate.
It is much
just
more
for
accurate.
Cortisol.
But really just for cortisol. So let me go on to another test.
Okay.
So I used to run the salivas.
Okay.
That used to be what I did in clinic. But today we use a dried urine test. And and it's kind of, you just have like a litmus paper, and you stick it in the pee, and it dries. And so you do some at 5 o'clock in the evening, then you do some at 10 o'clock at night. So we're looking at those variances through the 24-hour cycle. Okay. And that's extremely accurate for cortisol today. It's the most accurate. The DHEA, which is our anti-aging hormone, that it gives me cortisol and DHEA. Now it's going to give me testosterone, which women have testosterone too. So it's a very important hormone. Testosterone, estradiol, and estrogen. And what it does on the estrogens that is extremely helpful for us is it'll give me downstream metabolites. And what do I mean by that? It says once you've created that hormone, what does the liver and the other organs actually do with it through the body? And how it breaks down. And is it a 2-hydroxy, a 4-hydroxy, 16-hydroxy, these different pathways that it goes down. This is particularly estrogens. But it can also tell me on testosterone, are you androgenic? So that's heading towards what we would call in women's health, estrogen dominance.
Right.
Which is huge today.
Right.
That's got a lot to do with toxins, xenoestrogens, plastics, things in our environment that are driving us that way, that can create a lot of symptomatology. Women have got a lot of kind of, I would call them more male dominant type of symptoms. Women come to me and they go, I've got hair sticking out of my chin, or I've got this going on, or that. Or I'm very, very moody before my periods. I'm having terrible troubles, my periods. So running this test, we can actually see, are they estrogen dominant? They could have breast problems. There's a lot of symptoms to estrogen dominance.
Yeah, so we've talked about it on here before. It's becoming more of a household name, which is good. I think, awareness is key.
Exactly. So that test is super, super helpful for that. So it's very helpful for the stress side of it.
Okay.
And all our adrenal work that I do in our clinic, and my colleagues and peers in our profession do too, use this test for adrenal support work. So we can determine how stressed somebody is through this test. And then we can put them on a program of hormones and herbs, where we might be using some other supplements that are adaptogenic and things, and CBD if sleep is an issue. This will tell us if sleep is a problem. So we get that from this too. Then we will put them on this program for a specific period of time in a certain way that mimics the natural way that your body is supposed to work.
Okay.
So people are always curious, if I go on this program, how long am I going to be on it?
Right.
Well, scientific studies and research have shown us that if you have a certain type of adrenal fatigue, then it's going to take a certain number of months to correct that.
Right.
But the fantastic news is we can correct it. 100%. We can get people back to not wired and tired, which is kind of that state that women are often in. And so that test is just fabulous for, as I said, for the adrenal fatigue and for the downstream metabolites. But if the female hormones on there are, again, not what I would look at if people are struggling with their cycle, for instance. Say a woman's maybe not having a period every month, she's having it every 3 months, or she's not having one at all, or she's having one every week. I mean, I see all sorts of crazy stuff, right?
All kinds of things.
Or she's bleeding for 20 days. I mean,
that was another feedback I got from our podcast. Was these long periods.
Exactly. So what we would do is I would run that particular test I just talked about, because I will not intervene on female hormones if I haven't dealt with stress. You have to deal with cortisol first. You will never, ever resolve these secular issues that are going on if we don't do that. Now, it's even a little bit more complicated than that.
Right.
Because if we look at health, if I said to you health in A, B, C, it's going to be hormones, which we just mentioned, all this endocrine stuff, right? Hormones.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Digestive, gut.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the third part is your detox pathways.
Right.
And so the difference between traditional medicine and holistic health that I practice is that I won't look at any particular area. If you want to lose weight, which is what we started on, you want to lose 20 pounds. I am not going to look at you in one area and say, oh, well, you've got a hormone imbalance. So let's fix the hormone imbalance and let's put you on the Whole30 program, which is a great program, right?
Right.
Fantastic program. Or keto, or whatever program we think would be appropriate for you. And you're going to be fine when you potentially have a gut problem or your liver detox pathways are clogged up. Right. So we're going to approach every person looking at them from these different directions, because it doesn't matter what you're presenting with. It's holistic.
you have to look at it, the hormones, the gut, and then the way you're detoxing. When you say detoxing, is that like your lymph system? Is that what you're referring to? Or is it
I
a little bit
am
different?
mostly referring to your liver, because your liver
your
is your
liver.
major detox organ. But
Okay.
then that affects how your gallbladder, of course, is connected to that. Your pancreas is connected to that, and then your kidneys, because your kidneys have to process gallons of blood every day, and then your gut, of course, because we want to pass the toxins through the bowel,
Right.
and then skin, right, largest organ in the body,
Right.
and your lungs. And
Oh,
we
yeah.
actually expire more toxins through our lungs than we do through any other organ. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So guess what? Just breathing.
I know breathing is so important, and
Yeah.
we don't do enough of it. Most of us are shallow breathers. And I was actually just shared an article online about mouth breathing and how prevalent that is. How many people are breathing through their mouth, which is not normal breathing.
No.
No. And not only that, I learned that you actually breathe out fat. When you're processing it, you're exhaling it. That's how you're burning it off. And that's why they say burn fat, because you're actually breathing it out, which was a fascinating, way to look at it, because then I had never looked at it like that.
Well, that's what I was saying about we breathe out the toxins too.
Yeah.
Same thing, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And where do we store toxins? In fat cells.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you talk about, it is crazy. When you talk about eating then, and this equation of eating plus metabolism equals health, are there foods that we should be avoiding when it comes to our hormones and keeping them in balance?
Well, definitely as clean a diet as you possibly can eat. The quality of your food matters, and where you're getting your food from, and also how it's been raised. So there are so many food groups today where they're adding hormones. I mean, I think of pork, I think of dairy. Unfortunately, conventionally raised, they are adding horrendous products to these animals, which just from an animal welfare perspective is just
questionable at best.
Questionable, absolutely. Yeah. And so I definitely tell all my patients what food we eat and how we eat it is the number one thing.
Okay.
And some people can afford, they don't have a massive budget, they may be on a strict budget.
Yep.
So, first of all, we don't need to eat as much meat as most people are eating.
Right.
So we can look for a lot more plant-based proteins. We definitely need protein. But fish, clean fish, of course.
Yes. Then we run into that. We run into that issue. I feel like every time I turn around, there's an issue with another food.
Right. There is, and you're absolutely right there. And then, of course, we have the food groups like the gluten and soy. I'm not a proponent of soy when it comes to hormones. I tell women not to eat it. Now, if you want to
so interesting, because they used to promote it as something you should eat.
Right. And if you look at Japanese women, because people always look to the blue zones of the world from a food perspective, and you look at the Japanese culture, that some of these people live very long, healthy lives, that what we don't realize is they're eating fermented soy. So there is this distinct difference. So soybeans or tofu, for instance, right?
Right.
It's unfermented. But miso, tempeh, and gluten-free soy sauces, so may watch the gluten content of soy, of course.
Yeah.
But those types of soy sauces are actually fermented. So in small quantities, those are not a problem.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's
very interesting.
There is some health benefits to phytoestrogens that are coming from foods. But again, it's quantity, how it's raised, it's just the source of your food. It matters. It really does matter.
Right. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I do get that debate come up from time to time, like what's worth it? What's worth it? To me, I think almost all of it's worth it to try to get it as clean as you can. I know there's the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen.
Absolutely.
That's a great place to start.
It is. The Environmental Working Group, so ewg.org is a great website. It's got a lot of information about water and how clean is our water, because that's another thing. So, when we talk lifestyle, and I do emphasize that in our work, we should be talking 85% lifestyle before we start intervening on the supplements or the other
Right.
therapies.
Right.
You know, are people living a healthy life? Because it's going to be their lifestyle that determines the longevity of a program anyway. So if you're going to spend all this money intervening on your health, but you're not willing to make the lifestyle changes, no, you just want to eat fast food out of plastic wrap,
yeah,
then, you know, I'm not your person.
right. 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 But I mean, if
because
you're
it's an
looking,
investment, right?
yeah, and it's long term. And I likened it to, you know, it's a kind of like a layer at a time. When you're attacking some of these things from lifestyle changes, you'll see small changes over time, and it's kind of like a layer. You get a layer better, and then another layer better, and then another layer better. It's not like taking a medication where, you know, the symptom goes away instantly. But the trick with the medication is you're treating the symptom. You're not getting to the underlying problem. And unfortunately with that, we know that leads to more issues that then come up, and pretty soon you're on 4 or 5, 6 medications. And at that point, you're treating side effects of other medications. And so although that may be the quick fix, you know, if you really do want to fix the problem, you have to have a little bit of patience. And like you said, you do have to be willing to make the lifestyle changes and adhere to them.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a partnership too. You know, when you're working with a health professional like myself, and I do encourage people to have somebody in your network. You know, maybe you don't have a major health challenge. So our culture tends to say that until we fall down and we can't get up, we don't actually go looking to have health professionals. And I guess it's like entrepreneurs who don't have an accountant until they absolutely need one.
Right.
It's the same thing, right?
Right. You wait till the very last moment. Yeah. But with your health, I mean, I can't encourage everybody enough to be proactive, because if you've never felt bad for a long period of time, you don't know what it's like. And trust me, it's not pleasant. And you're going to want to feel better as soon as possible. And so if you can avoid that whole thing and just make the lifestyle changes now, you will be so much better off. And you just don't want to have to, you don't wish that on anybody, just feeling terrible for long periods of time. And it takes time. It takes time to pull out of these things.
You asked about food groups, and you asked about, you know, types of food to eat. One test that I would tell people that is pretty simple, not expensive to do, and it's not this long pages and pages and pages of foods, is called the FIT test, FIT test.
Okay.
And what it's going to do is it's going to test you for main groups, and it's looking for intolerances. And the way that they're testing, it's one little pinprick at home. It's a test kit that comes home and you send it to the lab. And it's a single pinprick. Listen to me, a pinprick of your finger, and it's going to tell us the key things: the dairy, the gluten. Are you actually sensitive to these things? And I have actually found that to be a really helpful test. I will say this: there are many tests out there that you can have for food intolerances and allergies, and most of them are very complicated. And I think they definitely they destroy people's confidence in health, because they come back and tell them that they can only eat 2 foods.
Right.
They're so crazy. They're so ridiculous. And that's just not real.
Right.
So, you know, and I like the FIT test because sometimes compliance is a big deal in our world. And people ask me, do I really have a gluten issue?
Yeah.
Now, I don't like gluten, right? But I am here to say that there are people's genetic codes that actually let them tolerate gluten. They can actually get away with it. And so before you say 0 gluten for the rest of your life, why not just do a quick prick test and find out? And
if it actually is an issue for you.
It is an issue for you.
Now, I've read somewhere before that if you stop eating gluten, that your body doesn't produce the enzymes to break down gluten in the future. So like if you stopped eating gluten unnecessarily, say, then when you went back to it for whatever reason, you would have trouble with it. Is that true?
Yeah, that is actually true. And I think that what's important to know is that when people go on extremely restrictive diets, and there are reasons in some cases clinically to put people on restrictive diets because we're wanting to do certain clinical work. And so that requires us to put that person on a diet. You do not want to keep them on that diet for long because of the exact reason you just said. The body adapts and then it actually creates its own allergies. The immune system is really smart and it'll start to create allergic responses to those foods. And this is how people find they can only eat 2 foods or something. It's crazy. So you have to start increasing the tolerances. And how we do that is use specialized immune products. That was something we never spoke about earlier, but the immune system is just another part of our body that is so incredible. It's amazing. And it has an ability to come back and communicate in the right way, but it is often the culprit of so many of today's challenges. People's skin rashes, eczema, psoriasis, lots of skin issues. And that's an autoimmune, right? So when the immune system starts to attack itself, it becomes what we would call an autoimmune condition, which is very common too.
Right. Well, we're hearing more and more about autoimmune diseases all the time. In your opinion, how much of it do you think is a gluten intolerance versus maybe got something to do with, the Roundup that's in the glyphosate that's in our wheat now that was not present many years ago?
I think it's a combination. And I think the way that the wheat is raised before they spray it with glyphosates is, first of all, it's hybridized, right? So they've hybridized it first. So the wheat that we see in the United States versus the wheat they see in Italy, it's just all France. It's just a completely different crop. Yeah, it's very different, which is why some people who have a gluten sensitivity can actually use einkorn wheat. You may have heard of that. But you can get it on Amazon. It's EINKORN. And some people are much more able to tolerate that. And they can then continue to enjoy making some breads and things at home. They can use that. But that's actually an ancient wheat that is grown in Italy.
Interesting.
Yeah, so you'll go and investigate that now.
Yeah.
Anyway, so but the glyphosates is a huge, huge, huge deal. Yeah. And it's on everything. And it's in everywhere. It's in our air. It's in our water. Yes. Every person is being exposed to glyphosates.
Yeah. And recently I learned that it's found now in our tissue as well.
100%.
Yeah. So you mentioned a little bit about cortisol, and we talked briefly about adrenal health there too. So how does cortisol affect our weight gain or weight loss? How does that play into the whole?
So when our cortisol is out of balance, so the first thing that happens is when we stress is our cortisol starts to rise. It starts to go up. It's known as our stress hormone. And so when we are stressed and cortisol is high, we start to store weight because the body is self-surviving. So it will say, I'm in a survival mode now. I'm in fight or flight, right? You've heard of that term. That's the stress statement. And so it's going to hold on to whatever it can because there's a tiger coming, right?
Right. It doesn't realize.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not going to release. It's not in free flow. It's not just balanced. And so when cortisol is high, you're going to find it really difficult to lose weight. So, and along with that, you could have a very common to have a thyroid problem with that. And which came first, the chicken or the egg, the thyroid or the cortisol? It can be a bit of both. And so I will say this is that here's another whole area and another topic for another day, but thyroid meds are way oversubscribed. Most people who are on them honestly didn't need to be on them because it was probably a cortisol problem. It wasn't a thyroid problem at all. Interesting. It was being driven by cortisol. And so you have, when we go back to that test I mentioned, you have free cortisol, you have total cortisol, and you have metabolized cortisol.
Oh my
so one
goodness,
of the things we have all these different forms of cortisol, and then you have cortisone, which is the inactive form of cortisol, that the body will be another metabolic pathway that the cortisol will go down. So when we're producing cortisol, it's not just a case of, are we producing too much? It's how are we using that cortisol? So this is metabolism, right? This is the burn rate. Are we converting it into metabolized cortisol, or are we converting it into cortisone? So we're pushing it all into the inactive because the body doesn't know what to do with it.
Okay. So why does it get so messed up where it doesn't it doesn't know what to do with it? What happened, Claire?
Because we eat crazy food and we have crazy genetics, and then we combine the genetics with our environment and we have epigenetics, right? And then
And like, what about medications like birth control and stuff too? Does that play into that whole thing?
It sure does.
It does.
Yes, it does. And birth control. So first of all, of course, the way birth control works is that it suppresses estrogen and progesterone. So, and I can run hormone testing on women who are on birth control, and I do all the time. And depending on their case will depend on what I would say up front. And, if it's appropriate to say, let's get you off that, then great, but it isn't always, right? So it could be a social reason.
Mm-hmm.
And could be health reasons. There's a lot of things that go into that. But obviously their female hormones are going to be rock bottom because they're meant to be. That's the whole purpose of that.
Right.
But it's driven a cortisol problem because now when progesterone is suppressed, you're going to drive, it's called a progesterone steal. It's going to push the cortisol up. So women who are on birth control invariably have cortisol challenges. They go together.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then they'll also have yeast challenges in the digestive tract or in the urinary tract. A lot of UTIs in birth control clients because it drives that.
But like you said, we can reverse that, right?
Absolutely.
So if we want to, like, I know so many people have been on birth control for many years and now in their 40s or whatever, really having some struggles. And so if we want to just like wipe the slate clean,
yes,
and just kind of start over, what can we do?
Okay, so that's an excellent question because again, I will reiterate that I would start with cortisol. We want to deal with their stress first.
So we would get our cortisol checked first?
Yes.
Okay.
So you would get a test that we would look at the cortisol and how's this stress profile. Right. And they, are they sleeping well? What's going on with all of that? Because that's to do with your 24-hour cycle. If we just go straight for the hormone, the female hormones, we're going to have no impact because we haven't dealt with the stress profile.
Got it. And I think that's what happens to a lot of people.
Right. So a medical doctor isn't going to go there, right? OBGYN isn't going to go there. They're going to go straight for the female hormones.
Right.
And they're probably going to give you artificial, like bioidenticals potentially, but they might not be. And if you just put those in, you're not going to help that person because they've got a cortisol problem going on. So here's what we would do. Correct the cortisol first. So get the adrenals, get the thyroid, get all that balance first. And that sounds complicated, but it's actually very, very simple. And it's very effective and very straightforward. So you get that resolved, get the person calmed down, they're feeling good, they're producing their 24-hour cycles great. Now their sleep has improved. They're not waking up at 3 a.m. With a blood sugar problem. All of that is behind them. But we're still sitting with the problems from the birth control. So periods haven't come back. Maybe they're not menstruating. That's very common. Doesn't come back, or it comes back in a crazy way.
Okay.
So then we would run what we call a cycling test. And that is specifically female hormones. And every other day they would give a sample, and there's saliva ones and there are urine ones. So we do either. We work with both. There's different companies that do different ones. Right. And that allows us to give us a 28-day or 36 or 40 or whatever it is, because sometimes these are crazy, right?
Yep.
It allows us to see how the estrogen and the progesterone are behaving together. And then we can intervene with hormones, pinpointing into the cycle, mimicking again the way the body should be behaving, and we can then get it back balanced.
Okay. So when you say intervene with hormones, does that mean bioidentical?
It means bioidentical, and these are naturally produced hormones. So we use natural hormones. So some of the hormones, that's another whole world, but the bioidenticals are not always natural.
Yeah. Oh, okay. But they're called bioidentical.
Right.
Okay.
I
Okay.
know. Yes.
So it does, is that a pretty like, is that something that's really okay to do and temporarily as far as bioidentical, or is that something you could
Right.
stay on long term, or where does that play in?
I think our intervention is usually temporary because we want the body to behave. We want to get people into a natural state, correct a situation, and then let them be and take them off these hormones. I am not in favor, say women who are past menopause and they want to be on hormones. I'm really not in favor of doing that. I will help them through processes, and we will, be on hormones whilst we need to in order to clinically correct something.
Right.
But I'm not an advocate for long-term use of bioidentical hormones. I just don't, it's very personal. I have a lot of colleagues who agree with me. We don't think it's right. We just don't think a woman of 70 should be having periods. So, I think there's a natural process in life. And if your cortisol is great, here we go again. Stress, stress, and stress. Stress is going to run you ragged. It's going to make you age. It's going to make you look, decrepit. It's not going to let you have vibrant energy and full of life every day. You should be able to be beautiful, no wrinkles if your connective tissue is great. All those things. I don't think you need them. I see it over and over. You just don't need them if your body
is functioning at its optimum level. Yeah.
Which includes minerals, vitamins.
Giving it what it needs to operate properly.
Yeah.
So I know when I saw a functional medicine practitioner years ago, I was very intrigued by the forms that we had to fill out. It was pretty interesting. So I want to talk a little bit about stress and life events and why you guys asked those questions. So I specifically remember seeing questions like, have you experienced a death in the family? Are you grief, divorce, moved, lost a job? Like probably 30 questions of that nature. What is that about?
Well, we don't want to ask all these questions just because, right? However, we do warn people that you're about to fill in a book.
But I love that because that's the detective work of functional medicine.
Right. Because what happened to you as a child matters. What happened to you in your 30s, if you're in your 40s today, it really does matter. Have you had trauma of various kinds? And that's what we're seeking. We're looking for those trauma moments in your life that you might have gone through and felt like you've got over, but your adrenals and your thyroid are still carrying the signatures. They're still stressed out unless you've had specific therapy for those factors. We also look to see if we would recommend you have other people in your life, because it's not just about us. It is about a team. Do you need a therapist? There are wonderful brain retraining strategies today that retrain the brain, reprogram the neurons, and there's incredible things out there. And we are in a world where we actually have access to those things, and so we can educate. I'm an educator, and I'm here to open your mind and your heart and your soul to what's available to you. So by asking all those questions, we're able to put this picture together of your life. And I can't tell you how many times people have said to me, wow, it makes them cry because they've never had to think about their lives in this way.
Well, and I think there's an old analogy where it's like a frog in a hot water, a pot, right? You put a frog in a pot and slowly it starts to boil, and then pretty soon, like, you don't even realize that the pot's boiling. And I think so many people get put into that situation. Like, how do we know? The way we live today is so high paced. Everything's got to be done yesterday. Everyone's running around doing things. How do we know if we're living in that overstressed, position?
Tammy, whilst you're talking about labs, I'll just say this, and I mentioned it earlier. I really do encourage people to find somebody who they like, who they would feel confident and trusting with, to have as a partner in their health. And alongside their chiropractor or their acupuncturist, but I'm saying somebody who really does truly understand the whole medical world as well, who could be a guide for them. because,
Yeah.
my patients are heroes in their own lives. I'm not the hero, they are.
Right.
I'm the guide. My
Right.
job is to guide you and to have this understanding of where we are in this world, the environment, the toxins, all those things. And so
Right.
I just tell people that even if you don't have health problems, I have many CEOs, people who are C-level executives in companies who come to
Uh-huh.
our clinic, and they come once a year. They have one test run, which is actually a metabolic test.
Right.
It's a metabolism test. It looks at their brain. It looks at how they process fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. It looks at their mitochondria. It looks at aging, genetics, all their vitamins, their minerals. It's one test. It gives me some gut profile. I mean, it's amazing. It just
Right.
blows your mind, right?
Right.
It's not a hormone test, but it's a health test.
Right.
To me, it's the most fundamental health test that exists in the world today. And it's been around for 25 years and people don't even know it exists.
What is it called?
It's called an organics acid test. You're testing the metabolic organics that come out of our urine. It's one urine, and all this information is in your urine. Isn't that amazing?
Yes.
And so people come to me and they have an annual health check.
Yeah.
And say, what's the state of play? Am I doing okay? And then, yep, thanks. Can you just make sure I'm on the right supplements or whatever I need to be on? And I'll see you next year. Bye.
Yeah.
Isn't
That's
that
wonderful.
fabulous?
Yes. That's the way it should be.
Right. That's exactly the way it should be. And so that's my mission, is to get people off treatment and onto annual checks. And then you have your medical doctor, and they go to their medical annual, and they go to their functional annual. And, people are doing preventative, and they're doing what their insurance company needs them to do. Because obviously we're not covered in insurance because we're doing preventative medicine.
Right.
But one is your health, and the other one is just to satisfy the insurance companies.
Right. Well, I'm hopeful because I know that New Mexico has just passed a law where they will accept naturopathic doctors through insurance now.
Yeah, there you go.
So that's really a step, I feel like, in the right direction, because I'm very passionate about the fact that we should have the ability to choose how we want to be treated in our health. Yeah. And we're forced to have the health insurance in this country. So why are we not allowed to pick how we're being treated?
I know, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. So but I'm hopeful. I'm really hopeful. So we talked a little bit about detox too, and I want to kind of bust a myth about that as well. So there's, some people really think, detox diets are just the way to go. Everyone needs to detox. I think everyone's heard of the lemon juice, cayenne pepper, water diet, blah, blah, blah. And, some people will say, oh yeah, detox diets, you definitely have to detox that way. And then other people are like, there's no way to detox. So what are your feelings about that?
Okay. So my specialty is hormones and metabolism, all right?
Yeah.
So I am a huge advocate for metabolic detox. Okay. So that might sound like, okay, she's into detox. Well, I am, but it's kind of a science-backed way of detoxing, and we run labs to make sure where is a person on the scale before we start, so that if you did have a significant issue in some system that we weren't aware of, that we are checking that first. I might not go back to check again, depending on people's abilities, whatever their budget is. I want to work with, I'm sensitive to those things.
Yeah.
But professionally, I'm not going to put you on a program that could potentially change or hurt someone if I don't have information. We are 100% evidence-based, so that's the way we work. So metabolic detox, we are working with the different phases of the liver. So liver has phase 1 and phase 2. They work differently, and phase 2 is based on amino acids. So it's more different amino acids that work there. Glutathione, you've got your master antioxidants. These are sulfur-driven antioxidants. And so those are really important, but if those pathways aren't working, people can't detox. So that's really important to know. Usually people can do phase 1, but very often they can't do phase 2. And so if you just go to a health store and buy a package off the shelf, which is probably going to cost you quite a bit of money.
Right.
And you're going to go and do this 2-week detox. People can get really, really sick.
Interesting.
Maybe their bowels don't open properly. Maybe their kidneys don't open properly. Maybe
there's
other things going on. It's back to that whole holistic spiel, right?
Right.
They may be stressed out of their mind. And so doing a detox is going to put more stress on their body than they already had. It can be very stressful. So again, it just needs to be done. Drinking lemon water every day is obviously great idea, right?
Right.
You know, and there's definitely things we can do on a daily, weekly, monthly basis that's going to help us. There are things that we can do seasonally that are just naturopathic.
That's a good way to think of it, seasonally.
Right.
Yeah.
And people talk about doing coffee enemas, colonics, hydrotherapy. I mean, colonic hydrotherapy, you may have heard of that.
Yeah.
There are some great practitioners in that field. Acupuncture is a way that can be helpful to open up detox pathways. So this massage can be extremely helpful. Lymphatic drainage, dry brushing. I mean, there's all sorts of
kinds.
Things. Breathing, right?
Breathing. I know that is such an easy thing. And again, it gets overlooked all the time because it just seems like it's almost too simple. But I've heard of people just going and really diving into a breathing regimen and being able to relieve migraine headaches.
Exactly.
Just from like really diving into a program that, you know, requires you to do the 20 minutes of breathing a day. Breathing.
Exactly.
It's just amazing.
Exactly. So, and back to detox, I mean, one of my recommendations is if you have been to your doctor, you've had your annual checks, and you've had a comprehensive metabolic profile run, you've had a blood panel run, CBC with differential, you know what your liver enzymes are. There's some fundamentals to know that you're okay, you're good, your kidneys are functioning well. And then maybe you could do a good detox. Just make sure that you are working with, I recommend you work with a nutritionist or, you know, functional person or somebody who kind of knows what they're doing. But, you know, those kind of things would be a baseline, just to have the baseline, knowing that you're in a good shape, and doing some detox work would be safe.
Right. I've actually heard some pretty crazy regimens for liver detoxes. And where people lay on their side and drink oil, and they're doing that unsupervised. And what are the dangers?
Those, it's naturopathic gallbladder flush. Yeah, we do those all the time. But again, you know, I tell people just do it under supervision, especially the first time. Maybe the naturopath can say, hey, you can do this every quarter, you'll be fine.
Is that something that would be healthy to do every quarter, or not for everybody?
No, it could be. It does.
Could be.
It opens. But again, you can't just do that. You need to prepare for it. So you need the diet preparation and making sure, just the very fact that you are expanding the bile ducts so that you're opening the body up. So that it's safe to let it release, Otherwise, all we're doing in detox, if we don't prepare adequately, is we're going to move those toxins from one part to another. And the scary part is it could be to our brain. If we're not moving it out correctly, if it's not going from the liver out through the bowel. And then you get into that whole world of people talk about mercury and heavy metal detoxification. That is not an area for anybody to be touching without working with somebody who's specifically skilled in that area, which we are. That can be scary. And then there's mold and other areas too that really need to be dealt with professionally.
So the bottom line is that yes, detox can be quite effective, but it should be done under supervision. It's not something you just want to go buy off the shelf. And chances are, if you're buying it off the shelf and, you know, procedurally, you're not really sure what you're doing, you're not going to have the benefit of it anyway. So it's not worth it.
The idea is to feel lightheaded, clear-headed, and a lot of vibrant energy and fabulous.
We talked a little bit about herbs, and I want to dive back into that a little bit because I think, you know, there's lots of kind of, mainstream things that people have heard of, maybe black cohosh or whatever for herbs. But when is it time to kind of seek out that when you're getting, maybe just having some symptoms of that? When is it appropriate to seek out herbs?
It can be very helpful for women. And if women don't want to go on bioidenticals, or there's some reasons not to use that, we will definitely use herbs for sure. And black cohosh is one of them that we would use.
And that helps just with regulating the hormone levels. Is it estrogen specific or progesterone specific?
Yeah, you just got me. I'm trying to think, black cohosh, and I'm like totally spacing right now. What's the other one we use?
I've heard of black licorice too, can be quite helpful.
Yeah, we use those for cortisol. Anyway, if your listeners want to know, they can.
I can put
we'll give them a link. I'll give you a link, because we'd use one for progesterone and one for estrogen, and we balance those out. So I will send that information to you. I'm completely spacing on it right now.
No worries.
It's late in the day.
It is late in the day. And it's getting dark so early here. It feels like 10 o'clock at night right now with all this snow and coldness that we've been having here in Colorado.
Yeah.
So bioidentical hormones definitely could be something that would be a fit for some people. But again, you want to work with a practitioner. And it's not something that you want to be just like the herbs, you don't want to be on them long term. Is that correct?
Absolutely. It's interesting because you've got herbs like maca. You've probably heard of maca, MACA. Yes. It's a South America. It's very adaptogenic. So you've got, and then when we think about, we use a lot of herbs in the cortisol world when we're working on adrenals. And so often once we've finished with the hormone part, so when you hear hormones in our world, that is not a long-term sustained. It might be a year. We may have somebody on hormones for a year because we're working with them,
right?
But it's not something 5 years down the road we believe you should be on. But the adaptogenic herbs that support that, absolutely you could be taking ongoing. So if they're adaptogenic, they're healthy. And so there's certain herbs. So
when you say adaptogenic, do you mean like it just kind of it gives it a little push? Like it's a enhancer to make the body do what it should be doing?
It's a balancer.
It's a balancer.
So it doesn't stimulate, it doesn't suppress, it works with your hormones. So it actually encourages your hormones to do what they were designed to do. It's not going to push them. So there are herbs though that are stimulatory, and there are herbs that are suppressive. So those I would call more therapeutic. So just herbs, and you see that, oh good, I can just take all these herbs. And no, some of them are particularly, they could be antimicrobial, and they could actually be as strong as an antibiotic, right? So they are therapeutic. So that's for an intervention. But when I say adaptogenic, that means that they are safe to take long term. And maca is one of them. Ashwagandha is a good example.
Yes,
people that have very imbalance free to metabolize cortisol. The cortisol is kind of all over the place. They're wired and tired.
Right.
Ashwagandha can be very calming, very balancing for them. So I love that. And there's also cordyceps. Cordyceps is a mushroom.
Oh, okay.
And cordyceps with ashwagandha can be incredibly helpful for just balancing out people's adrenals.
Oh, that's interesting. That's really interesting. Do you recommend taking herbs in liquid form or in pill form?
I like the liquids. I like the tinctures. The tinctures are really, because they usually are much purer. Now, again, you want to know the companies. There's a company called iHerb. There's Herb Farm. That's another one. PHARM, I think it is. That's a good one. But there are good herbal companies. There's a company called Good Herbs. That's a good one.
Yes.
Just you want to know that they produce them well. There's another company called Energetics. They actually have spagyrics. Now you're talking. Spagyrics are done with the moon and the stars and they are done on a cycle, and they only harvest them on full moon.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, it's so incredible the way they produce these. There is love and care that goes into these herbs that
Right.
are amazing. So
Wow.
I'm a great fan of that company, because I just love, there's an Amazon herb company too. You might have heard of Amazon herb company. That's a great one. I think they might have spagyrics too. Several companies that you can find around that have spagyric herbs, which are beautiful.
Wow.
Amazing.
That is amazing. Well, thank you so much, Claire, for being on today. This was so informative. Where can people find you again?
Okay, so I run Kelway Functional Medicine, and you can find my website is actually my name, Clare, C-L-A-R-E, Kelway, Kelway.com. That's me. And my Facebook is Clare Kelway Live is my page.
Okay.
And that's where you find me.
That's great. And I hope people realize too that you're virtual. So
yes, I am.
Yeah. Yeah. So anywhere in the world, really,
we do.
You can accommodate, and that's awesome that you do that.
Well, you're stressed, so you don't have to drive the I-25, right? Just want to sit at home.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Claire, for being on today.
You're so welcome. I will just say this too in closing, that if anybody has a question for me, we do offer a free discovery call. So if they wanted to do a 15-minute call on their hormones, then they can contact us, and we can set that up.
Oh, that's wonderful. Oh, I hope people will take advantage of that, because this is definitely, I think, a perfect place to start before you. So many people get misdiagnosed when it comes to hormones and women's issues. It gets slapped with, Xanax or some other kind of antidepressant, or because they're trying to treat your anxiety or the symptoms of what's really going on. But that, long-term is not going to help. Really getting to the root of the problem is what you need to do.
Absolutely.
So
thanks, Tammy. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being on the Naturally Inspired podcast today. If the Naturally Inspired movement makes sense to you, let's do this together and transform the medical model and help people take charge of their health. Learn more about how you can join the Naturally Inspired movement by going to naturallyinspiredadvocate.com or call me at 970-475-4862.